Good afternoon, everyone. The choices we make today about the challenge of climate change will determine our future. I'm going to lay out the Institute's position on how we rise to this challenge and reimagine the UK's net zero strategy. The UK has delivered good progress in decarbonising the economy. Since 1990, the UK has reduced our emissions by 50%, and in 2023, UK emissions were the lowest they have been since 1879. However, reducing remaining emissions to meet the net zero goal will be significantly more challenging. Behind me are some of the targets the Committee on Climate Change have indicated that we must achieve if we are to meet the legally binding carbon budget for 2035. They included fully decarbonising our electricity grid by the state. The new government has committed to reaching this milestone by 2030, which means even faster progress. If the UK doesn't achieve reductions in one sector, we would need other sectors to work even harder to find additional reductions if we are to meet our overall goals. So, how is the UK tracking? The graphic on the screen behind me shows we are not on track, and in some areas we have little hope of achieving the actions required to meet the budgets. So, what's the solution here? The Institute's paper, Reimagining Net Zero, summarised the changes needed to enable Britain to meet its goals. These focus on the levers to drive investment and shape the markets for clean technology, and unleash innovation by utilising our strengths in science and technology. This is what is needed if we are to harness technology to address some Thank you. However, even if the UK meets its own net zero goal, we still have a problem. The UK currently contributes around 1% of global emissions, and this will drop to around 0.67% by 2030. Let me be really clear here. I am in no way letting the UK off the hook. All countries need to reduce their emissions if the world is to limit temperature rise to less than 2 degrees. But today, global emissions are at an all-time high and have not yet peaked. When we look at the sources of emissions, we can see that these have changed radically from developed to developing nations. And there are regions, such as Africa, where future populations are forecast to double by 2050. We have seen that energy demand rises quickly as development accelerates, and this has major implications for emissions. Historically, populations moving into higher income bands have also resulted in large increases in emissions per capita. And this could happen in many developing countries with significant impacts for the climate if countries like the UK don't take action. This is the key issue we must confront if we want to turn the tide on climate change in the decades ahead. And the UK can and should play a leading role in addressing this challenge. We need to take action both domestically and globally. The answer can never be to stand in the way of economic development in these regions. Rather, we must ensure that this development is not powered by fossil fuels. This involves supporting the deployment of clean technology and innovative solutions to help developing countries grow both in population and economically while controlling emissions. The good news is that many of the solutions are already at hand. The cost of producing electricity using solar and the cost of batteries have both fallen dramatically over past years and are already cost competitive with coal and natural gas plants in India and China respectively. More than $1 billion is being spent every day on solar deployment. We have also found new solutions to a number of other challenges, and further innovation may make these more widely deployable. Powered by AI, we are even making huge strides in accelerating the development of fusion. Technology is starting to pay dividends. If we look globally, we can see an acceleration of action. For example, China is investing heavily in renewables and added more solar panels in 2023 than the US in its entire history to date. However, in Africa and Southeast Asia, private investment in clean power is actually declining. To address this, the UK's net zero strategy should emphasise both domestic execution and accelerating the global transition through technology and investment in regions like Africa. The UK needs to look outward, not inward, driving emissions down both at home and abroad in a way that aligns with economic growth and development globally. The solutions lie with the power of technology and the investment needed to deploy it. In more good news, both of these areas, the UK has the ability to be a global leader. We are a world leader in the deployment of clean technologies and home to a mature and innovative clean tech ecosystem. And we can leverage our position as the leading hub for green investment finance, driving investment in the low carbon solutions that are ready to be deployed globally. We should also be thinking carefully about investing globally to secure the UK's own share of the trade in clean tech for the coming years. In practice, this means utilising London's strong financial centre to develop innovative financial structures to drive global investment in clean technologies. It means designing the National Wealth Fund to support investment internationally. And it means leading the way in investing in international carbon markets. We can also drive international collaboration on research and the development of new technologies by leveraging our strengths in key sectors to drive innovation to speed up climate action, by creating an advanced market commitment within the World Bank for catalytic climate solutions, and by forging new international partnerships to develop and deploy new climate solutions. The scale of the climate crisis demands unprecedented global cooperation to secure a sustainable future for all. The UK can and should be a leader in this. Thank you. So now, to discuss how we can unleash innovation and drive investment in the technology solutions we need, I'm very pleased to have two leaders with me here today. Can I please welcome to the stage Elan Gur, the founding Chief Executive of the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, and Greg Jackson, founder of the Octopus Energy Group. Thank you both very much for joining me today here. Great to see you both. I'd like to start actually first with you, Ilan. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experience in developing and commercialising clean technology, including your past experiences in Activate, ARPA-E and your startups.
Sure. I'm Elan Gur, the CEO of ARIA, the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, a new R&D funding agency here in the UK, built to empower scientists and engineers to create breakthroughs for everyone. My personal background has been spending a couple of decades on climate innovation from a number of different angles in academia, startups, government, and I think if that's taught me anything, it's that in order to make progress on climate, you have to be a climate optimist. And I think we've earned the right to be climate optimists. So I just want to start with that perspective, which is when I first got into climate and thinking about how material science could make an impact, there was a big question around, is it even possible to imagine technologies that could decarbonize the industries of the world competitively with fossil fuel? And it really felt like a pipe dream. So I got into solar, and if you were to ask someone at that time to just sort of round numbers, what is the cost of solar energy, especially if you were again connected to the grid, they probably would have ended up rounding up to about £1 a kilowatt hour. If you ask someone today, I imagine they would round down to a pence a kilowatt hour. And that is just absolutely mind-blowing. So we have gone from a time where the question of is it even possible to have these technologies to a time where, basically a bet against decarbonizing the world in growing economies is a really bad bet to make. And then to your question, I've been really privileged over that time to work in a couple of organizations within government and government supported to understand how government funding and nonprofit and philanthropic funding can be catalytic in this. And by supporting scientists and entrepreneurs who want to create new climate tech solutions, we've seen these tipping points where now we're on this incredible learning curve in solar and wind. We've actually seen innovation get us onto the learning curves and these tipping points in CO2 capture, translating CO2 into chemicals and fuels, geothermal energy, large-scale grid storage. So we're very much on our way.
That's great and fantastic to start with that optimistic message. I completely agree with you that we need more of that. Greg, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experience, innovation within the energy sector and why this is critical for Octopus Energy.
Yeah, I think we started with the consumer. The energy sector only exists because households and businesses need to use it. And yet, most of the policy focus starts at the supply side. We relentlessly talk about the different ways we can, for example, create electricity or make burning stuff slightly less damaging. But fundamentally, when you change the technologies in any industry, you change how people can use it. So a couple of examples, we're talking here about the plummeting costs of solar and wind. Our electricity system was designed around coal. They could turn on a coal power station, got a rectangle of power. It didn't really matter when you used it. But if I say to people, if you use your electricity when it's sunny, it'll be 5 times cheaper than fossil fuels. It's amazing how much more people use at those times and how much less they use at others. It's the same with wind. Incredible, at the same time as we're getting these advances in generation, so we see advances in other sectors, transport and heating. An electric vehicle battery holds enough power for a typical house for 2, 3, 4 days. A typical range may be 300 miles, and the typical UK commute is 9 miles. So we've got incredible flexibility about when we fill those car batteries. And it's automated. So today, 170,000 people in the UK get home, plug in their electric car, and we just charge it at the best possible time. In return, they pay around £2.40 for 100 miles of motoring. With diesel, that would be £16. It is 7 times cheaper to drive an electric car than it is to drive a petrol or diesel in the UK. If we think about using the system wisely, that's charging those batteries when it's windy or sunny or the system's empty or when the interconnectors are flooding over from France. The point being, if we look at these technology changes not as a challenge but as an opportunity to drive down costs of the most fundamental commodity, we can finally align the interests, the short-term interests of citizens and businesses with the long-term interests of the planet.
Great, thank you. Just more on this theme around sort of innovation. Ilan, quite interested in the link between scientific development and commercial application, in particular innovations and breakthrough climate tech that ARIA has been involved in.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things we talk about at ARIA is being here to raise ambitions of scientists and innovators and have them reach for sort of the edge of the possible. And why is that so important? It's because, as I mentioned, in any of these stories of transformation at the very early stage, it doesn't seem possible. And often it's an individual, a small group of people who see what can be done theoretically, technically, and are willing to sort of push for that edge of the possible, against all odds. I think one thing that we think about for ARIA is the power of entrepreneurship and science entrepreneurship in moving us forward. If you reflect back, it used to be that in order to do anything meaningful in the world, especially in technology, you had to be engaged with a very big organization. That's where you got the sort of infrastructure and the resources, the knowledge, and the networks to do anything. One of the biggest things that's changed in sort of growth and economy is that now, small groups of people can drive enormous change. And that's something that we want to activate. I mean, Greg's a great example of that, right? In terms of being able to really change the system. So at ARIA, we're thinking across our programs around not where are the areas that are critically important to scale, which is the primary thing right now for climate is how do we scale at pace for the planet and decarbonization. But for us, it's a question of where do we still need to reach for the edge of the possible? So where are there areas within climate that are highly consequential, but there isn't enough innovation or investment? And there are talented people across certainly the UK, this just incredibly rich talent and resource base in science and technology that could create those new options. And I'm happy, I don't want to keep talking, so I can share in due course what some of those are. But
Yeah, great, thank you. Just picking up, you talked about investment, and we've identified that obviously in the presentation as one of the two kind of key drivers here. Greg, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about innovative sort of market mechanisms, maybe corporate power purchase agreements or storage investments, but investment in the energy sector and how these have supported Octopus Energy.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I think our company's raised more money onto its balance sheet from investors than almost anyone else globally in green tech. And we've also raised many billions into assets. And I think, look, at the end of the day, all investors ideally want high risk-free returns. And if you offer them that, it's quite interesting just how much money you can put into infrastructure. But I think the reality today is that there are limits to that. The backlash we get about subsidies in green energy, for example, the fact that yesterday, I welcomed the government's relaxing of the ban on onshore wind in England, and immediately had people saying to me, well, if it's cheaper, why does it need subsidies? Fundamentally, we're still operating in a highly broken market. And so I think we need to, first of all, maximize our use of things like corporate PPAs. That's, by the way, where someone building a wind farm or solar farm has an agreement with a large corporate to take the electricity. But we now need to be able to break the mold and work into the world of what's called merchant risk. That's the way that investment works in almost every other sector. So, if you want to build a yogurt factory, you don't get a government guarantee on the price of yogurt for the next 25 years. You just assume that you're going to be able to sell yogurt. And I think innovation really does need the ability for us to break free of government mechanisms. Let me give a couple of examples. One thing we've done recently is we built wind turbines where local people get 20% off their electricity when it's windy. They get 50% when it's very windy, right? The magic of this, first of all, is that people use more electricity at those times it's generating. Secondly, communities want wind farms when you do this. 26,000 communities have now reached out to us asking us to build wind farms locally. That's just in the UK. We're now launching this in 5 other countries. But the third thing about it is the more we use locally generated electricity, the longer we can hold off or even avoid building new transmission lines because we don't need to ship it around as much. But at the moment, there are no market mechanisms to deliver this. Now, fundamentally, at the moment in the UK and almost every other advanced economy, we've got a complete lack of price signals. So in the UK, every half hour, the electricity price across the UK is the same. It's the same whether you're in Scotland and all the wind farms are turning, or you're in Slough and we've got so little electricity you can't build data centres. Now, this is crazy. What we need is a real reform of markets so that, for example, when it's windy in Scotland, we don't pay the wind farms to turn off. We give Scottish people cheap or free electricity at those times. And we can see that the shortage of electricity in other regions means, we'll build batteries in the southeast. It will give us the investment signals. And I think it is absolutely outrageous that 1/3 of the time, the interconnectors between the UK and other countries are flowing the wrong way. So at the times we're turning off the wind farms in Scotland, we're importing electricity from Norway into Scotland because we've got absolutely screwy price signals. And so really, I think the most innovative thing we need to do now is create much more dynamic pricing at the back end. We can wrap this into incredibly compelling products for consumers. According to FTI Consulting, if we were to have dynamic regional pricing in the UK, every region would be cheaper than it is now because we're eliminating waste. It would save 50 billion quid over 14 years, and our estimate by is 100 billion because they're saving on infrastructure. And data centers wouldn't be queuing up, waiting 10 years to be built in Slough or going overseas. They'd be setting up in Scotland, which would have the cheapest electricity in Europe. And the reason I mention this in context of the sort of finance is ultimately, of course, if we offer risk-free returns, we can get the lowest cost of capital. But sometimes it's worth sacrificing 1% of the cost of capital for a 10 or 20 or 30 or 50% improvement in the efficiency of the system. And so I think we now need to work together, policymakers, the energy sector, innovators, and large users of energy to be able to create these mechanisms that will unleash innovation and drive down costs for everyone.
Great, thank you, Greg, and great to see those recommendations about locational pricing, and we've picked up those in our report, Reimagining Net Zero.
I think you had it on your screen,
yeah. I'm just conscious of time. I just wanted to ask you both. So when we're thinking globally about this global challenge, what do you see as the emerging technologies and innovations that you think hold the most promise for this global challenge? And how do we ensure that these receive the investment that they need?
Cool. Well, look, someone told me the iPhone changed the world, right? I don't know whether everyone's... increasingly, by the way, I think there are some people who weren't around or don't remember the iPhone being launched, because I'm getting old now. But in 2007-ish, the iPhone launched with Edge, if you remember, the little E symbol for its wireless connectivity. If today you open your phone and you get Edge, you literally put it back in your pocket and write a letter because it'll be faster, right? But that technology is enough to change the world. And we didn't wait for 3G and 4G and 5G and whatever else comes next. We got on with it. And today, solar, wind, hydro, long-distance interconnectors, they're all proven technologies. They're all cheap, and they're getting cheaper every year. What we really need is the smart grids, for example, the price signals, but also the smart grids that enable us to deploy these at scale now and to electrify everything rapidly. And then if we get fusion enabled by AI, or if anybody ever makes carbon capture storage work at anything like an acceptable price, then we can start changing. But the number one thing is to electrify everything. And I've got one chart I saw earlier I would love to be able to put on screen, which was the pace of electrification in different economies. Europe and the US are flatlined at about 20% of our primary energy is electricity. China is on this still steep exponential curve. It's about to hit 30%, and it's growing further. And a bit like our focus on consumers, if we focus on electrifying end use, first of all, you get an immediate efficiency gain. An electric car turns 80% of the power into motion. A petrol car turns 25%. A heat pump achieves 300 or 400% efficiency. The best you'll ever get out of a gas boiler is 90%. You get less emissions running a heat pump or an EV on electricity that's entirely generated from gas than you do from a fossil fuel vehicle or heating system.
Let me give a complimentary answer just before we run here, which is I think globally the priority is how do we get to scale with decarbonized technologies as fast as possible. And interestingly, I'm a chemist, material scientist. One way to make a reaction go faster is put more energy in, raise the temperature. But that's actually the brute force way to do it. By far, if you want things to go 10, 100 times faster, you find a catalyst. And I think one of the things that for me is exceptional about the UK is it has the ability to be a catalyst in this transformation globally. First of all, you think about the financial leadership position that you mentioned, Lindy. You think about the geopolitical position. But I think more than anything, the scientific and engineering knowledge and talent and resource base here can be such a big catalyst. So just one example, one of our program directors at ARIA is actually a mathematician computer scientist. He's developing a program where with cutting-edge math and scientific models, we could potentially create guarantees on the output of an AI system that it's operating to spec. Where can that be used? He's initially realized that actually this problem Greg's talking about in terms of how do we increase the efficiency of the grid through optimal controls is something AI can do, but it's really hard to implement in that environment where you don't want to get things wrong. And basically, we've recognized that that actually could be an incredible test case, within the UK's grid system, advanced AI, where all the technologies of renewable integration and firm energy technologies could then come here, want to be a test bed for these sorts of optimal control technologies. You bring the talent base, and then the UK could be an incredible leverage point to move that to the rest of the world. That's one example, and that's kind of related to how do you boost the existing things we know are going to work, and we're looking at sort of what's next, what are the next pieces. The UK has an incredible position in fusion, and it will at some point be the important competitive edge for the world. But also we're thinking about things like, we know we're in a race against time, but how do we know how well we're doing at decarbonizing? It turns out measurement and monitoring of CO2 emissions has been really neglected from the innovation community. Enormous strides we can make there to understand what will be the consequences and how well are we doing. So those are some of the things that we're really excited about.
Can I just give one quick example of scale there? Just on
You're never going to get us off the stage.
Just very briefly, and on that AI point, I mentioned earlier this charging electric vehicles that gives you motoring 7 times cheaper than petrol and diesel. That's enabled by vast amounts of AI that forecasts for every car when it's going to get home, when it's going to plug in, how much battery it's going to need, what the driving habit's going to be, and what's going to go on the grid for the next 24, 36, 48 hours. In 1 year, the quantity of that we've done in the UK is growing from 0.2 gigawatts to 1.1 gigawatts in 1 year. That's the equivalent of a nuclear power station. A nuclear power station that might take 20 years and billions of dollars to build. This kind of combination of AI with EVs and smart grid is delivering it exponentially more quickly.
And that's a fantastic positive note to end on. Thank you very much to you both.
Thank you.